Well, in a game called What Feels Illegal But Isn't, I dragged one of my kitchen chairs into my bedroom to film this, and I'm like, you don't belong here. This is not your place. Anyway, I hope you don't mind that I got all dolled up for you, hair and makeup, because this is my most anticipated event of the year. Today I have none other than my favorite books of the year to talk about with you, so I hope that you get yourself a nice ice water. I have mine in the Fuzzies cup, and I'm not going to make you sit through the top 24 of 2024. No shade to people who do. I, however, struggled to even find 10 books that I liked this year because my reading taste this year was absolute smack garbage. I was not in good mental spirits this year, as evidenced by me getting on antidepressants. That being said, I reached for a lot of things that were easy to read but not necessarily good. Some of them ended up making the list. I really was only able to squeak together a list of 10. Not spanning too many genres, but still, I hope you hear me out. So I have 3 honorable mentions to start us out with. I feel like I want to rest my arm here, but that's not very ladylike. The first honorable mention is one that I read for the plus size readathon, which was The Do's and Donuts of Love by Abida Jakwadar. So this book follows a main character named Shireen, who is a baker. It's a young adult book, even though it looks middle grade based on the cover. She enters like the equivalent of the Great British Bake Off show, but in Ireland, because she and her family own a donut shop, so she's a pastry chef. And when she gets there, she realizes her ex-girlfriend is also part of that. So there's like a love triangle between her and this other competitor, and it's all about her being in this baking show and the ramifications of her also being a brown girl because her family is, I think, Bangladeshi. I got up for 5 seconds to go sit in front of the fan because sitting in front of an open window is already getting to me, and spot has been confiscated. Okay, I also scooted my camera angle. Do you like it? This book was so precious because it is purely a feel-good story. It does have its moments of like social awareness and not overly obvious writing about race and sexuality. For the most part, the author said in her author's note she wanted to write a book that wasn't confronting homophobia in her Bangladeshi family or fat phobia. So it's a plus-size main character who loves to bake, and she's queer, and her parents support that and they're very kind to her. But one thing I loved about this book is that she is a very flawed main character, and the way that she thinks is sometimes a lot of blaming others and not taking accountability, and she's very hard on herself. But I just found it so realistic that she was the problem some of the time. The baking show elements of it kept me guessing. I didn't think it was super formulaic, so that was also interesting in a genre where typically I might be afraid of a reality TV component being a bit cheesy or sketchy, but I do think it did that really well. So I thought that book was really cute and fun, and I would recommend it. My next honorable mention was also for the plus size readathon, but a complete opposite end of the spectrum. It was Blood Moon by Gillian Graves. This is like a paranormal urban fantasy book about, I shouldn't say book, it's a novella. It's a main character who's a witch and a love interest who's a vampire, and they meet at a party, and the whole book is just them smashing. But then they realize that they have like bars across from each other that are competing. Did I read it for the plot? I'll let you guess that. I thought this book was so raunchy, but despite the short length of it, you really get to love the characters. It was just filthy. Like, it was really well written. So if you just want something quick, Halloweeny, emphasis on the weenie, I would definitely recommend that. I had a lot of fun with it. And my final honorable mention is Faith and the Dead End Devils by Catherine Moon. We can't get through a year-end video without a Catherine Moon mention because I am obsessed with her. This is the final book in Catherine Moon's Omegaverse series. Yes, we're gonna talk about Omegaverse in my favorite books of the year video. This one is definitely one that you could not read as a standalone. It is almost a companion story to the one before it because it is the twin sister of the previous character. She has been captured by this evil organization that kidnaps Omegas, and the main character, or the main male lead of the book, gets her out of that situation and kind of rehabilitates her and keeps her safe. The vibe of it is very much like scared, traumatized, and because it's Omegaverse, it's like almost feral, and he's having to like respond to that and be gentle to her and like kind of snap her out of it. So the vibe of that, I hate to be an anti-feminist, but I live for that kind of thing where it's just like almost like that Akamath trope of she's been through a lot, he's just kind of there to teach her how to read and to give her the pep talk to get through it. So the Omegaverse for me is not so much about like nodding and gross and liquids, even though It's a little bit about that. The thing I love about it though is it adds in this like primalness that humans don't have, and that really ups the ante for me of just like the fear response and how intensely they feel things for each other. I love it. That is a long series, but highly worth it. If you have not read Catherine Moon at all, you should get on that. All right, and that leads us into our top 10. So I will start at the top with number 10 and go all the way down to what was my number 1 book of the year. This is loosely ranked. There's definitely a winner. So number 10 is another book from the Plus Size Readathon. I was on a roll. It is Wrote Me In by Kayla Gross, which some of you might be impressed that it made it to my favorites, but I can't stop thinking about it. So this is actually the sequel to a different book called Rain Me In, which I thought was very mid. So these books, as you can tell from the cover, is cowboy and Western romances. So the first one follows a girl coming back to her hometown and the country to help out on her family's farm, and she was reunited with this guy that she knew when she was growing up. The sequel, Wrote Me In, which I think was so much better than book 1, is about that dude's brother named Cade. Backstory: his father died before the start of the book, so he is depressed and an alcoholic, and he's kind of the problem child of the family, and everyone's like, you need to grow up and get over it and like be a man and own your family's business and all that jazz. In book 1 you see glimpses of him and you're like, he's annoying, but then in book 2 it's all about him and that journey of getting better. Female main character of this book is a fiddler who's like trying to escape her past, so she comes to this town. She's a plus size main character and they pursue one another, and it was everything. It was so good. This one had so much emotional depth, more than just sex, because there is some BDSM elements to this, but a lot of it was about the emotional journey of it, which I hate to say, I think because of that you can't read this as a standalone because so much is predicated on book 1. Y'all, I'm sweating again. I have to bring my fan over here. I'm so sorry. If you hear some white noise, it's definitely not a fan blowing beneath me, but I hate that I committed to the bit of needing to wear a sweater even though it's like 70 degrees today in Texas. Anyway, so Cade and this girl whose name I do not remember have to work together to save his family's farm, and then he's also grappling with all his emotions of losing his dad, and it's a very mental journey that he has to go on, but I think their relationship was so much more meaningful because of it, because she also has anxiety, and so he was able to help her through that, and then they both got help, and I was very invested in Cade. I thought he was such an interesting, flawed main character. I guess that's kind of the theme of this year, is I love flawed main characters. So even though the writing wasn't the strongest, I do think that book 2 is a vast improvement from book 1. This book was sexy, this book was heartfelt, it was emotional, it was Western, there was horses. I had a really fun time reading it and it made the list. The next book that made it to the list was a total surprise, came out of left field, but this is called Beyond Words by Carl Safina. This was a buddy read that Bonnie and I did for a lot of the year. It took us pretty long to read this, but this was a book that I found at a library bookstore. Never heard of it. I got it to try it out intentionally to read with Bonnie, and this book is told in thirds. So each third of the book is told about a different animal. The first one is elephants, the second one is wolves, the third is whales, and Carl went out into the field and talked about these animals with the people who had spent decades researching them and observing them, all to prove the point that animals have thoughts and feelings and their behaviors aren't just instinct. It's also like there's familial relationships there, and animals do have the capacity to think and remember and, you know, whatever. So this book was so interesting just from that standpoint of how animals' minds work, but also so much of it is about observing them. So these descriptions of Africa and Canada where they were out observing them was so atmospheric and gorgeous. And this also talks a lot about the impact of humans on wildlife, especially because the wolves that they looked after were the ones in Yellowstone in America, and they were almost extinct, and now they've been reintroduced, and there has not been a single animal, I feel like, that has not had some kind of impact because of human activity. So this made me very much more aware of animal life and how we impact that, and also some gaps in my knowledge that I want to research more, like poaching in Africa was super interesting. It made me aware that like humans are not the only animals or people in the world. There's family systems systems and other creatures and beings that have their own thoughts and feelings and family trees and history and memories. Very interesting. Super happy that I read this. Carl is a very talented writer and I would be interested in reading more from him. The next book I read, surprise surprise, was also for the plus size readathon, but it was the Bare Knuckle Bastard series. And small caveat here, I only read the first two out of all three of them, but the first one is called Wicked and the Wallflower and the second one is Brazen and the Beast. This series follows two brothers, so the first is about one, the second's about the other. The third is about the third brother, but we haven't read that one, so we're not going to talk about her. Anyway, I really want to talk about the second book in the series because that's the reason I found out about the books and it's really the one that I enjoyed the most. However, when I went to read the second one as a standalone, I realized so much of the action I felt like I had lost prior, so I went back and read book one, and book one is about this girl who's from the upper echelons of society. She's rich, she has everything she ever needs, and she meets this guy who's like a slumlord leader and he like lives and works in the bowels of the city. They just do like smuggling, so it's very much like he does dirty business but he's a good person. The whole plot of book one is she wants him to teach her, like she's like a spinster, getting older, hasn't gotten married, so she's like, I need you to teach me like how to make people want me. And I'm not going to explain how they get to know each other because obviously you can see they're from different sides of the world, but he has this mindset where like even if he wants her, he cannot drag her into his world because she is so much better than him. She deserves so much more. And her perspective as he's teaching her how to attract men and how to be like this shining star, she's like, but I only want him. So it is this gorgeous, amazing, like I cannot get the adjectives to describe the dynamic in this book. It was entrancing and addictive. The plot of it is gritty but also like sweet. It absolutely blew me off my feet. Very inventive historical romance in my opinion, and so when I went into book two, it got even better. So the main character of book two's name is Hattie, and she has this business that her brother's supposed to inherit, but he's like a loser drunk, no one loves him, and so she wants to take the business over from him, but her dad's like, no. So she's turning 30 at the beginning of this book and she decides that she's going to get her life together. She's going to fight for this business. She is going to lose her virginity, gonna move forward with her life instead of just being a woman sitting on the sidelines. And so she meets the brother of this main character in book two, decides to kind of use him as leverage to help her get her business. So they're in some like shady dealings together to both get something that they want. So from his perspective, she knows someone who slighted his business. He can help her get her business, but in the process of them working together, there's a spark. I think I love this book so much because Hattie is coming from the perspective of, I'm getting older, no one wants me, I'm too big, I'm too loud, I'm too professional. Like she feels so unworthy of romance, and he sweeps her off her feet. And he's a dirty talker, and he is dark and intense and mean, and oh my god, this book was so good. This book also really picks up with the drama of the villain. There's like a stark villain who, there's even some like physical violence in this book, so it's very intriguing. Becomes even more of a whirlwind with that, and I'm sure it's all gonna surmount in book three to something crazy, but have not read it yet. But it's so relatable because she's plus sized and because she has these feelings of being a has-been and a loser, basically. I just need more series written for women who are losers because I'm sitting here relating. All right, quick camera battery change. Are we good to move on? Are you good? Okay, that is the Bare Knuckle Bastard series. It was a whirlwind and a half. The more I talk about it, the more I'm like, why haven't I read book three? I need to get on that. The next book I read for a video, it was reading children's books, and it was none other than Winnie the Pooh. I had never read this before. It was my first time around, and I see why this is such a classic. I think it also helps that you obviously know about Winnie the Pooh before reading this, but it was so precious. There were illustrations throughout. This is the first one in a series, and I 100% would read the rest of this series. Each of these chapters has a moral or is just silliness and fun. The vibes of this book were immaculate. It was super sweet, super cute, super fun. I think it stands up well to time. It was very easy to read. I got lost in this. I could read this over and over, honestly, and I know that there's more books in this series, so there's also more to uncover, but I had such a fun time with this, and it made me really want to watch the movie, and it felt felt very familiar because you had been familiarized with some of the scenes here. Between the art and the cozy writing style and the vibes of friendship and the fact that Pooh, if I can use his first name, is so, I don't want to say stupid, but he has this naivety to him that is so endearing. Like, he and Piglet will walk in circles for hours and you as the reader are aware of why he's wrong, but they're just like tottering around and having a good time. Again, it's just super fun. So I really enjoyed this year, and if you have not read this, definitely recommend. The next book I want to talk about is the first in this massive fantasy trilogy by Victoria Aveyard. I was highly interested in this after reading Red Queen last year, which if you go and rewatch my favorites of 2023, Red Queen topped the charts. I was blown away by that series. I thought it was so inventive and the characters really stood out, and it was incredible. When I knew that she had this other series currently going, I was like, I'm gonna need that. So I read it and then read the rest of the series, so you can sort of sprinkle in the rest of them here as well, but this is the only one that I own physically. Like I said, this is a fantasy trilogy. This is a Lord of the Rings inspired series. So the main character follows Coran, who's the daughter of someone who has like special blood that can open portals to other worlds, and her uncle opens another world, but for nefarious reasons. The survivors of that go and find her so she can help them close the portals. As they go along, they just keep grabbing more and more people to help them with their tasks. So by the end of it, there's an immortal, an assassin, this 17-year-old girl, this young man who used to be a squire for a knight. God, but like a soldier from a far-off army. There's a guy who does counterfeit documents. So there's just a ragtag team of people who are all on this mission to help stop this bad guy. And I can definitely see the inspiration from Lord of the Rings having watched the movies this year, because this is so much of a physical journey kind of book. The map in this series, I think, is the thing that most impresses me. And this first book is very geographically based, so a lot of it is just like familiarizing you with the landscape and each kingdom. I will say it is a lot of political fantasy as well. There are elements of this dark demon who's gonna help this villain take over the world, and there's an undead army and stuff, but most of it is really just like going kingdom to kingdom and making allies. It's a very slow burn series, and I'm very brave. I deserve a Medal of Honor because this has barely any romance. You have to wait until book 3 to even get a kiss, and even then it is subtle. But the emotional journey that these characters go on and the way that they bond with each other over 3 books, in a way it's kind of predictable how all these characters will react and harmonize together, because each of their personalities is so strong that you begin to predict, okay, when this happens, this person's gonna be exasperated, this person's gonna make a joke about it, this person's gonna roll their eyes. But then by the end of it, it's like they just work so well as a team. So even though this took me a while to read, like, you just really get invested in these characters. This also ended pretty open-ended, so I feel like there might be a spin-off series about 2 of my favorite characters. I just felt like this book had a lot of heart. It was very easy to picture. I felt like I was watching a movie in my head. Even though at the time it felt like a labor of love to read so much description about the kingdoms and the political drama, by the end of it I'm like locked in. Like, I feel like I had it drilled into my head, and now I'm like, you could assign me to write a fanfiction about this and I would remember every little detail of every little kingdom, which is rare for me because I tend to read things and then forget. So the fact that I could tell you this main character's name off the top of my head just shows you how well it stuck around. Red Queen slayed. This was also really good. The next book that I loved this year was An Offer from a Gentleman by Julia Quinn. I did start and read about half of the Bridgerton books this year. Are they over here? Yeah, right here. This is the third one. This is Benedict's book. This, to me, is the blueprint for the Bridgerton books. This is the most underrated book. I feel like everyone who's read all the Bridgerton books has a different favorite one, and maybe because I haven't read the second half of them, maybe there is a better one and it's gonna get even more uphill from here. But Benedict's book was the end-all be-all for me. It was incredible. So this is a Cinderella retelling. So the main character is Sophie, and she's just a maid, but goes up to a ball one day and she meets the Bridgertons, and she meets Benedict specifically, and they are enamored with each other. But because of the nature of her job, she has to leave, disappears, Cinderella. But Benedict finds her one day and like gets her out of a bad spot, not realizing that it's her, and she recognizes him but he doesn't recognize her. And then there's a lot of drama. The best way I can explain the rest of the plot after the whole Cinderella vibe is it is strangers to enemies to lovers. So he kind of has to win her over in the second half of this book. It is so emotionally dense. I will say that Benedict is not a perfect character. Sophie can never do any wrong though, so I will not hear any slander. I just was addicted to this because it was so passionate. The emotions in this were so vivid. I think the plot of it was also very, very clever. It wasn't just like, he's a duke and she needs to get married. What are they gonna do? There was all this backstory with the Cinderella storyline and identities and positions in society that held them back. I tore this up like nobody's business. I tabbed so much of it. The writing in this series is stellar. It's popular for a reason. I could devour this whole series in a week probably. Like, look how many things I highlight on one page. The banter between them goes crazy. Benedict is like the smooth talker of the family. He really came out of nowhere because in this TV series I was like, okay, Benedict, whatever. I hope that they pull a lot of the dialogue from the show right from this book because he was eating. He was chewing up that dialogue. So this book just has so much yearning in it and just so many relatable emotions. I guarantee I will be sad for the TV series coming out about these characters. Highly, highly, highly recommend reading the book before you watch the TV show because it's the best one so far. The next book is Extasia by Claire Legrand, which I just read recently for my spooky time reads. So this is a witchy book. Claire Legrand is an auto-buy author for me. I'm obsessed with her. And this one follows a young girl who lives in this village that's in a post-apocalyptic world where pretty much all the population has died, and this town is uber religious and teaches that it's because of the will of women and their risque ways that brought on the end of the world. This main character is training to be a saint of the town. There's 4 girls that basically are like a sacrifice to the town, where like they are the manifestation and the embodiment of the evil of women. So it's screwed up and fucked up. I read this book right around the election time and that made it so much more vivid. I love the author's note at the end of this. She says that she wrote this book because she wanted to write a book that was about like the patron saint of rage. So this is female rage embodied. The other half of the plot is that these men start dying in very cryptic ways that they know is unnatural. So this main character is devoted to talk to the devil to get him to stop killing all these men. And in that endeavor, she finds a clan of witches and then slowly discovers through these other witches what's actually going on in her town. This book is intense, but it was so good. I love Claire Legrand's writing style. It was absolutely gorgeous. The thing I find really relatable about this is it's not just an outright man-hating, revengeful book about the society. This main character takes a long time to come around to what she's been put through is wrong. And so I think it was a very realistic take on that. But the vibes of sisterhood in this and all the women working together and having each other's backs and being a safe refuge to go to, I think was a very reassuring message. You know, based on the author's note of wanting this to be about a person who is so rageful, like that comes through. It's a little bit subtle because despite the rage, there's also this like tenderness to her. So it's not just like cutthroat women who hate the world. It's a very quiet kind of despairing rage where you are just so embittered by disappointment in people for, you know, the way that they are and the way that they believe the world to be. This also has a sapphic romance in it, which I felt was developed so sweetly and so nicely, because once again, it is these girls who are like the town punching bags, and so they find refuge in one another. So really the theme of like women finding each other in times of hurt was so sweet in this, and I just found the message overall really interesting. This has just secured Claire Legrand as an author that I will never skip a book on, other than the book that I haven't read by her yet. But I definitely highly recommend this if you're into that kind of thing. The next book that I loved this year was also a historical romance. This one is A Night to Surrender by Tessa Dare. I also feel like I can't make it through a year without recommending you a Tessa Dare book, so there's a series title for this that I do not remember, but this is a book that I read, finished, and then bought all the other volumes of the book of the series They're like over here somewhere. This main character of this book is named Suzanne, and she lives on the coast of England. She is a spinster who runs this home for women that's technically, like on paper, a etiquette school, but in reality, when all of the adults and the family members are gone, these women just talk candidly with each other. They go swimming, they do all their crafts that they enjoy. So it's on the surface this like taming house for women, but then once everyone leaves, it is a place where women can just come to be themselves. There's the backdrop of that, but then the action comes into this book with Victor, who's a soldier of the War of 1812, who's nope, that's an American war, is it? Whatever. He's fighting in some war but had an injury, so he's trying to find any task that he can do in the war because he can't go back into battle. Suzanne's father, who's like the leader of the town, despite the town being like 90% women because of this school and, you know, haven that's there, he tells Victor that, hey, we're a seaside town, France is right over there, feel free to come protect us with an army of men. So Victor starts to bring together men to this town to start defending it, and Suzanne is not a fan of that. So it's really about these two characters going head to head about women ruling the town versus men ruling the town. And that sounds like high school drama when I say it out loud, but when I tell you the enemies to lovers and the rivalry in this book is unmatched. And meanwhile, Victor's also having to grapple with the fact that just because he has this disability and his leg not being what it used to be, like, he is no less worthy and valuable because of that. So these characters working together and eventually like getting to know each other more and eventually having a romance, I think complemented each other so well in the individual journeys that they go on to let each other in. You know, in Suzanne's case, literally, it was so good. And I immediately finished this, gave it 5 stars, ordered the rest of the books on Amazon. For some reason, they don't have sex indoors once in this book, so if you're into that, you would enjoy this. But I felt it was so soft, but also so meaningful, and the characters had such stark personalities. I'm really excited to read the rest of this series because all the side characters in this book of the other women and the other soldiers were also so fun. So I definitely need to give this a go in the spring or summertime, and I'll probably read all the rest of these back to back. But Spindle Cove series, that's what it's called. We're in the top 3, I should say. So this was top 3 book. Number 2 top book of the year is probably not a surprise to anyone, but The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe by C.S. Lewis is a book that I read for my Narnia series read. I read all 7 books back to back in one video, and unsurprisingly, this is my favorite because I love the Narnia movie so much. It should be concerning to other people, but I love the concept of being in a war-torn world and finding an alternate universe, even though that one is also like going through its own drama, but the escapism of finding somewhere else is so touching to me. Also, being able to live out your whole life and then come back and still be a kid is mind-boggling to me. Lucy also is such a precious character in my eyes. It is an allegory for Christianity. I see that very loud and clear, but I love that all the Pevensey children, so Lucy and her siblings, all have these very specific roles in the book. Like, Lucy is the curious one who just wants to help. Susan is the skeptic and the logical one. Edmund is the fucking idiot. This is the ultimate wintertime read. It's the ultimate feel-good read. I debated rereading this for Christmas and maybe making it an annual Christmas reread on top of rewatching the movie, which I love doing because Santa is in this book and this movie. But yeah, this absolutely did not let me down because I love the movie so much. So if you are also a Narnia lover and you don't know whether or not the book is as good, I loved it. We have arrived at my top book of the year, which I think you can all predict. You've probably been doing process of elimination in your head. Best book of the year by far, Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. And I know I am like 200 years behind the times because this, I mean, it came out in like the 1930s. This book took my life by storm. I cannot stop thinking about it. I already want to reread it. I'm blown away by this book. I can't believe it took me this long to read it. Rebecca is about a main character who is unnamed. She's just a caretaker of this elderly American woman, and they're on the coast of Monte Carlo. She has no family. She's just kind of floating through life. But then when they're in Monte Carlo, they meet this rich man from England who is the owner of an estate called Manderley. And he very unromantically proposes to her after they hang out for a couple of weeks. She's enamored with him. She can't believe it's real. She can't believe she's the chosen one. So she goes back to Manderley, which is this goth gothic, moody, massive estate that's like in the middle of these overgrown woods, and it's on the coast. The book's called Rebecca because she feels so inferior to the memory of this guy, Maxim's late wife, whose name was Rebecca, and whose reputation precedes her. Everyone loved her. She was this successful, gorgeous woman. This main character is half her husband's age and comes from nowhere and has no accomplishments. They really had no reason to get married other than she was there and he was there. I have never devoured a classic like this, probably ever. I was hooked onto this. It took a couple chapters for the momentum to really build, but I would read like 200 pages of this in one sitting. I think if you're a nostalgic person like I very much am, you would really resonate with this because the main character is telling this from the perspective of, this has all happened, let me walk you through what I wish I knew at the time. And in that, there's also this mourning of before everything in this book happens, because toward the end it becomes kind of like a mystery and a tragedy. So for the first half of it, she is like, I wish I could have trapped this moment in glass. I wish I could have preserved the innocence that I had here. It is so sad, but also just so reassuring to see someone think so alike me, because I felt so seen in this main character. She feels insignificant, she feels insecure, she wants to disappear at some point, she's awkward, she just cannot live up to the shadow of this woman that she's never met. There's a plot twist in this toward the end that will swipe you off your feet. I don't know why I said that like a Western accent. Allegedly, this is what Tolerate It is based off of, and if you are a Taylor Swift fan and you resonate with like the depth of her lyricism, I think you will also really resonate with this, because the bars in this, it'll eat you up. I'm just so sympathetic to this main character, and Manderley itself was such a gorgeous estate, and the scenery in this and the tone of it and the mood and the main character's emotions and the sadness, and I could go on forever. After reading this, I am so interested in reading Daphne du Maurier's other books or any Rebecca retellings, because this just took over my life. I loved it, loved it, loved it. Like top 10 favorite books of all time material. So this is a very personal pick because to me it just felt so relatable, but if anything I described sounds like you or something you would enjoy, it 100% is worth the hype. With that, that is my top books of the year. I feel like a lot of it overlapped with vlogs that I did, so maybe this is no news to anyone other than maybe my ranking of them, but I'm hoping in 2025 to read a lot more intentionally for books that I know I'm gonna love. So if anything I've described here makes you think of any books that I would like, definitely leave me a recommendation down below. I also want to know what your favorite books are, because this is my favorite time of year to add things to my TBR. So I appreciate that your time. Thanks for listening to what I'm interested in and what I loved the most. So I'll see you in the comments section. Bye everyone.